Hello, this is Kevin Klinkenberg, Executive Director of Midtown KC Now. This is a presentation to discuss Broadway Boulevard in Midtown. And while I am the Executive Director in this role, I really want to speak today as much as a resident of Midtown, where I have lived the majority of my adult life, and as somebody who cares very deeply about this part of town, as I'm sure you do as well if you're watching this. We have some ideas to discuss and potential solutions to share, but I want to emphasize that this is not about providing the answer. It's providing a series of possibilities for the future. And that while a lot of this may be very long-term solutions, the idea is we have to get started sometime. So let's go. We have a problem today on Broadway, and it's time that we have an honest and frank discussion about what's going on. This is not just about the public safety and disorder issues, which we have, which are many, but also about the physical condition of the street and the sidewalk areas as well. Obviously, things have deteriorated a great deal over time to where we now have many of the trees that were planted long ago are gone or will be gone soon. We have street fixtures and poles and others that are in disrepair. And there's just a general state of kind of uncleanliness despite the CID's efforts and despite the park department's effort. A lot of things just really seem to be falling apart. That's also led to or tied into a series of vacancy issues that we have. We have as much vacant land and buildings as we've seen in some time on Broadway. The street itself is also one of the more unsafe streets in our city. The City of Kansas City's Vision Zero plan identified several intersections in Midtown on Broadway and this corridor itself as one of the high priority areas for redesign and consideration in the coming years because of the extraordinary amount of injury, accidents, and fatalities that we had here. And by the way, this study was done only up through 2019, and it missed even some of the more recent tragic events, including the accident with a fire truck in Westport. Part of the reason that we have issues is that Broadway is just a very speedy street. It's designed for people to drive at a high rate of speed at any time, day or night. You can almost any time stand out there and observe somebody driving 40 miles an hour or more on Broadway Boulevard. That's important because if you happen to be hit by a vehicle, if you're a pedestrian, if that car is going about 20 miles an hour, chances are you're going to be fine. You may have some bumps and bruises, but you'll be okay. If that's going 30 or 40 miles an hour, chances are you won't survive that wreck. And as such, what's happened is Broadway has become a real dividing line in Midtown. So instead of uniting neighborhoods and being an attractor, it's become a divider because people do not want to congregate there or cross the street. And as I mentioned before, because we have the public safety and disorder issues, it's leading us into this terrible cycle where we have not enough storefront activity because people don't feel as safe on the street, and there's a lot of ugliness. And that lack of storefront activity is leading to even more crime and disorder on Broadway. I'd like to share a few things that I've learned over the years in regards to street design, because I think they're critical for us to think about what we might do to actually change things on Broadway. The first thing is that it's impossible to prioritize both speed and safety. You have to make a choice. If your priority in an area is speed, it will by nature not be safe, and that means not safe for anybody, including people driving cars. If you prioritize safety, then the speed is going to have to slow down. There's simply no other way around it. People also drive as fast as the road allows them to drive. So enforcement is very helpful when it comes to speeding traffic, but nothing helps so much as forcing people to physically pay attention to where they are and slow down. There's just simply not enough cops in the world to really enforce traffic safety all the time. You have to actually design it into the place to begin with. Another area of importance is that intersection design is really critical to street design. We don't often think about it this way, but intersections are where the backups happen. And because of that, our roadways are often oversized to handle the traffic at intersections. So that's why you see more and more use of roundabouts in places, because they have an ability to handle a fairly high degree of traffic at an intersection safely and slowly. That dramatically reduces crashes and also is safe to navigate for people on foot or on a bike. And then a last thing to consider is that if you really want to have an area where you have storefront businesses that are successful, you've got to have on-street parking. That on-street parking, that convenience parking, is really critical to the lifeblood of a lot of small businesses, and it has the secondary benefit of it provides a wall of protection from traffic by people walking around. So all you have to do to think about this yourself is walk along a portion of a street where there isn't on-street parking and see how that feels, and then compare it to the same street somewhere else where there is, and you'll immediately notice the difference. Before we get into solutions, I think it's also interesting to look at how we got here and some glimpses of the past, because the way things are today are not the way they have always been. This is how Broadway was at one time in Midtown. You can see that it had a streetcar line going down the middle of it. We had many more buildings and corners that were filled up with activity. And as we look at Midtown neighborhoods that Midtown KC now is active in, we generally look at the area between Crown Center and the Plaza, State Line to Troost. In that area, those neighborhoods have 1/3 of the population that they had at their peak. So when we saw some of those historic photos, the peak year for Midtown population was 1950. We have only 1/3 of that now in Midtown. That same trend has happened throughout our urban core. We've seen a nice leveling off in the last decade or two and a slight uptick, but it's still way below where we used to be. And one way that you can see the effects of this is that each dot on here represents what used to be a grocery store in Midtown. So as you can tell, we had dozens and dozens of little neighborhood grocery stores that served our neighborhoods very, very well, that were often locally owned, mom and pop places that are the kinds of places that people tell us today that they wish we had more of. We also had a fabulous streetcar system that was the backbone of how people got around the larger city in Kansas City. How did we lose so much population? Well, this is just one example of many, and it's not meant to pick on anybody. But if you look at the area where Penn Valley Community College is today, there used to actually be a neighborhood there, and this is a picture of that neighborhood. And unfortunately, we've seen this repeated over and over in Midtown, where hundreds of homes were torn down and either not replaced or replaced by some other institution or office. A little bit of street history for you. This is what Summit Street used to look like in Midtown, a nice little neighborhood street with a streetcar going down it and beautiful trees. And that changed into Southwest Trafficway, which is a very freeway-like condition that has existed now for several decades in Midtown. Main Street was similar. This was the old St. Paul's School at 41st and Main, and you can see the dashes on there show where the street was actually widened out to accommodate faster automobile traffic. And I share all this to say that we have this idea often today that that it's just too hard to do big things. We can't make big change in our city. Well, previous generations didn't think that way, and I don't think we should either. There is a time and a place where big change is actually needed to set us on the right trajectory. When Midtown was its most successful, it's important to remember that it was built around, first and foremost, about people walking around, a great pedestrian environment. And that's what we want to talk about today with Broadway, because the reality is that Broadway ought to be our best street in Midtown. It's a boulevard. It has the widest sidewalks in Midtown. It is a great connection from Penn Valley Park all the way down to the Country Club Plaza. It really ought to be our most celebrated, most enjoyable street to walk along, but today it's not. So these are some things to think about as ways that it could change over time. So here's Broadway as it is today. You can see the sad little pedestrian trying to cross in the middle of the street in a very dangerous area. One thing that cities will do sometime is add landscape medians to a place, and that helps shorten the crossing distance and add some beauty to an area. And then there are smaller versions of this that you can see around our city, these little pedestrian islands that help getting across the street a little bit easier. I mentioned before that roundabouts are a possibility, especially at certain intersections where you have room for them. And the beauty of those is they could allow us to take the street from the 5 lanes it is today to down potentially 3 lanes because you're not backing up at intersections. One example of a road diet here in Kansas City that's like this was 20th Street down in Crossroads. Here you can see the 5 lanes that it used to be with very narrow sidewalks and what it is today. It was changed to a 3-lane street with bike lanes and on-street parking. And what they basically did is they took one side of the road and made the sidewalk and landscaped area much, much wider. And so it made it into a much more attractive area to walk around and safer. Another road diet example is Baltimore Avenue in the Crossroads. This is what it used to be like with 4 lanes and parallel parking, and that was changed to 2 lanes with angled parking. And this simple change that was done just with paint and some signs cost about $10,000 and added 100 parking spaces in the heart of Crossroads. It's been a very successful change in that part of town. One other example that's not local is this street in Lancaster, California. This is Lancaster Boulevard, which runs right through the middle this is their downtown. And as you can see, it used to be a 5-lane street plus parking. And it was changed to this section, which is only 2 lanes plus left turn lanes, and then a very beautiful landscape median. And sometimes that median is angled parking, and sometimes it's festivals and event space and pedestrian promenade space. And that change in Lancaster has been a dramatic improvement for that community with dozens of new businesses. It's created an incredible attraction and destination for the area. It cost $11.5 million to build, and within 4 years attracted over 10 times that amount in private investment. Tax revenues actually doubled in a 5-year period before and after. And on top of all of that, collisions fell by 1/3 and injury accidents fell by 2/3 simply by slowing people down. So as we wrap up, I would just suggest that as you think about changes that you might want to make in your community, to think about changing and having an understanding of how you want your city to be, how you want it to develop, and then designing the transportation to fit that. All too often we do it the opposite way. We should be thinking about what kind of community we want to have first, then making the transportation work for it. But then what we do when we build it, it's actually the opposite way. We build the transportation first and let the development happen gradually over time. Thank you very much for listening to this discussion about Broadway. Please take the survey and we'll attach the link at the end of this.